Hi, and welcome to the first episode of BrainBar's new podcast series from the frontiers of tech and society. In this series, we'll discuss some of the biggest questions we face as human beings. Myths will be debunked, possibilities discussed, dilemmas raised. I am Marton Baranyi, and the guests of the series will be the founder of BrainBar, Greg Busarmeni, and Jacob Shapiro, Director of Analysis at Geopolitical Futures. Could you be killed by your own self-driving car? Should we celebrate Elon Musk for his Mars plans? Is social media new at all? Join us and find out in the first episode of BrainBar podcast series. Hello guys, so why don't we start with the moral machine experiment, which was quite important for the birth of our podcast series. Actually, this experiment examined the dilemmas we face when it comes to humanity's common values. But Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see ideas come into fruition in real life, unlike maybe some of the technologies we're going to talk about throughout the course of this conversation. So I work for Geopolitical Futures. I'm the Director of Analysis there. GPF is a geopolitical forecasting and analysis company that is founded by George Friedman. And basically what we do is we try to predict the future of the world, and then we try to understand it and see whether our predictions were right or wrong. And that's GPF in a nutshell. The genesis of this podcast came when Greg and I were having breakfast, and he actually was the one who said to me, "Have you seen this moral machine experiment?" And I said, "No." And he sent it to me, and I looked at it, and if you haven't seen it, you should go online, you should find it, just Google moral machine, or maybe we can even put a link to it in the link to this podcast at some point. But basically it gives you a series of scenarios. And imagine that you have an autonomous self-driving car, and there are scenarios in which somebody is going to die. Might be the passengers in the car, might be pedestrians, what have you. And the autonomous car has to make a decision. It has to decide whether it's going to veer away from the pedestrians and save the people in the car, or whether it's going to hit the pedestrians or sometimes the animals that are in the middle of the road. And the interesting thing is that what they did was they got results from all over the world, and they managed to see that people actually have very different preferences for what kind of ethical choices they thought this self-driving car should make. Now, the problem with that is if you are trying to design an autonomous driving system and you have to be different in every single just country to start with for how you're going to program that car to work, that makes it very difficult. And imagine even within society, things are going to have to be difficult. I actually wrote down a line that was in the paper that I thought was absolutely amazing. The quote is, "Whereas the ethical preferences of the public should not necessarily be the primary arbiter of ethical policy, people's willingness to buy autonomous vehicles depends on the palatability of the ethical rules adopted." That's incredible, because he's basically saying our ethics, the ethics that we decide on together, that's good, but it's not the most important thing. What we as scientists have to do is figure out the right ethical cocktail so that it is palatable to the person who is in the car or walking across the street.
Scientists without any moral education. So I think it's very interesting how moral philosophy as a general area is coming back in the age of technology as a very fundamental and necessary thing. And I'm not sure that MIT or any of our technology schools are actually having moral philosophy in its basic curricula, but we will need it once these cars are actually entering the market.
But which or whose moral philosophy? The scientists? The nations? Of course, we couldn't have a global consensus on that, and no such thing exists today.
So that was the point when I realized that the challenge of these autonomous vehicles is just impossible to solve. So right now I'm officially skeptical about will these things ever enter the market as mass.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the things to keep in mind, and this is true not just of autonomous vehicles, but it's true of any piece of technology you're going to talk about. I think, and Greg is exactly right, we think that moral philosophy and ethics and our personal standards aren't supposed to be part of science. Science has sort of developed this idea that it is objective, it is separate from life and culture, and it's just looking at the facts, and it has no moral programs. It may not even want to. I think most of them actually do if they want to be honest with themselves. But the problem is anytime you start using any piece of technology, you're going to have to think through how it's going to be used and what kind of morals are going to accompany it.
Or when you invent new technologies, you have certain worldviews and values and morals coming back from your childhood, coming back from your parents, from your school years. I mean, there is no neutral technology from that point of view. So from the inventor's point of view, an algorithm is necessarily ideological, whether it's positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
But many times when you invent something, it is leap forward. You have the product first and the dilemmas come after it. Sometimes you just can't think about all the different consequences. You don't have the capacity to do that.
I'm not sure if this is the case. I have to debate this because I think the founders of Google, the management of Uber, and all those guys in the industry have some very serious ideological determination, even if they don't think about it as ideology, even if they do not agree if we call them liberals or internationalists or globalists or whatever. But they do have a certain very strongly determined ideology behind their product. And the change what's happening here these years is the mass public is actually realizing these determinations from the customer point of view.
What I'm saying is that maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg know the complete potential of what he was doing or developing, and the problems came later.
But doing something without moral thinking or without thinking of the moral consequences is actually ideological itself, because it says a story of an inventor who thinks that moral is not important. It's not important enough to think about it at the very beginning. It's the ideology itself. It's the technocracy. It's the heart of being technocratic.
Yeah, and this again goes back to what kind of philosophy or what type of thinking should dominate or should you use when you're trying to think about how to use a particular technology, right? Like if you're thinking about autonomous vehicles, it makes a lot of sense because we don't want to sit in traffic and we want to be able to get from point A to point B very quickly. And in just the purest, most basic form, that sounds great. None of us want to sit in traffic. If we could organize the system so that we can just get in cars and not have to sit in traffic, that would be great. The problem is, though, just let's say you have a perfect autonomous driving system. Number one, think of all the drivers who no longer make money. So automatically, if you're doing this, you have a political statement, you have political factions you're going to have to fight with and deal with all these other things. Think about if some kind of terrorist could hack into the system and use it as a weapon, because tons of technologies don't begin as weapons and then become weapons, right? And then the Moral Machine Project takes a very, very small example, which is you're in your worst case scenario. Do you turn your life over to a machine? Does the machine hit the old person or the person with social status or the person who's young? And none of us can actually agree on which of those they should hit because we all have different philosophies that rule our
I think
lives.
we can call it nihilism even. I think if someone has the right amount of money and talent and labor force and network to change an industry with the ambition to change the society even for the better, there should be a thinking about the moral consequences. And if there's no thinking about this, that's a passive decision. A decision made by the inventors, the investors, and those who were working on the first prototype.
But here, though, I mean, this is the whole point. This is not the level of discourse that this conversation is being had at in just about any environment or society that is dealing with that I can think of, right? Like, people are not thinking about what is the social end, what is the political end, how are we going to empower people in order to create a better kind of society. It's really just, oh, there's this, the iPhone 11 is going to come out soon, and then we'll have self-driving cars, and everything's going to be great, right? Like, the companies are just kind of going along, and there's this momentum that it feels like you can't stop. And I think, this gets to, it's less about policy and more about politics, right? Because you get to this point where politicians have abdicated some of their responsibilities in that sphere, where they don't think it is their place to actually engage and to have these conversations. And in some sense, people don't think it's their place to do that, when actually the whole point of giving power to a government is to make sure they are doing things in the best interest of the people. And we don't think about that anymore. The amazing thing about Brexit was that Britain put that up to a vote of the people, rather than the government that was elected by the people to make those kinds of decisions, making the decision. It's the same thing here, right? Like, you have to empower governments, and governments have to give you visions, and politicians have to give you visions. And then you deal with an issue like self-driving cars and what is going to be the best for our city or our state or our country, et cetera. I would also just say, and you know, we're just talking about autonomous vehicles now, and we probably don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but a lot of this goes to autonomy in general when it comes to robots. I was talking with a colleague on GPF staff, and he was talking about, okay, well, what about a missile that is autonomous or is self-directing? And how do you program that missile? Is its job to complete the mission? If it determines that the best way to complete the mission is to sacrifice all the human members in the squad, is it supposed to do that, or is it supposed to sacrifice itself?
Not only a rocket, but also a car. Coming back to the car thing. So, what if you will be not in this situation to decide whom to kill? What if it will be you? Mm-hmm. Because that will be the cheapest social cost, and your own car that you paid for a whole bunch of money will decide to kill you.
Kind of pessimistic ending, but we have to move to our next topic, which is Mars. And I wonder whether you've come across these news or not, but now you can hear the winds on Mars. This may seem ordinary, but I had to stop for a moment when I found that and realized this was something that scientists dreamed about.
When it comes to the Mars thing, I would be very short. I just don't understand this overhype about that planet. It seems to me a really shitty place. just a worst place to imagine where to live, where to move. And I don't understand this whole pop cultural boom around the phenomenon, because this is not an appealing destination, not at all. It's very simple, very dry, very unfriendly, and still we are here having at least one blockbuster movie each year about someone going to Mars, successfully or not. And we have billionaires like Elon Musk thinking and speaking about why we should move there without any serious reasoning, only saying that we can, so we have to, which is just not enough. And NASA are spending huge money to build up a program to reach to Mars as well. So for me, it's not necessarily a smart move from humanity to focus on that shitty place.
I was somebody who, if I had been smart enough, I would have been an astrophysicist. I was like always fascinated by astronomy and by planets and like the search for other planets and and I just wasn't smart enough. Like you have to have a certain level and type of intelligence in order to engage in that kind of thing. So I admit to being somebody who is fascinated by space travel and by the possibility. I think really what we're talking about here is the possibility that we are not alone in the universe. And I think that's why humans are so captivated by it. And it goes to your point. You were looking through these things, and now you can hear the wind on Mars. And it doesn't matter that you could see Mars in the sky not whenever you wanted, but you could see Mars from here all the time. I saw that on Twitter, a photo went viral. It was sunset on Mars. And people were saying it was so beautiful. To your point, Greg, it didn't look very beautiful to me. But it turned out it was a 5-year-old photo or something. And it was making the rounds again because somebody said, oh my God, now we have sunset on Mars. And I was like, we actually had it 5 years ago, but it set off another thing. But no, I think your fundamental point is right. I think it's completely unrealistic to think about Mars as a place to settle. Like we have plenty of this planet, A, to take care of, and B, to settle as well. We're not doing what we could to take care of this planet, and we already want to go and imprint ourselves on another. At the same time, the amount of technology that came from NASA's quest to go to the moon was tremendous. Everything from computer systems to, I can't think off the top of my head, but a lot of these things that we use today that have made our lives easier and better come from that thing. And I think one of the things that motivates human beings is if you give them goals and if you give them these things that, enchant their imaginations, it's good. But this goes back to the autonomous cars thing. Why do we want to go to Mars? Like you said, nobody's articulating a good reason beyond we can do it. We should. If the technology that will come from that quest will give us something, then yes, we should invest the technology and we should do it. If there is some resource that we can get from Mars that might be able to transform life on Earth, that might be a reason to do it. But if the goal is just to go to a planet, where you can't live unless you terraform it, and we don't even have science.
And that is the point where I'm skeptical. So I absolutely agree on the inspiration power of the Apollo program, and I'm a big fan of President Kennedy's Rice University speech. We do this because it's hard, not because it's easy. Yes, I agree. But right now, I see the circumstances slightly different. So Elon Musk, for example, one of those champions of the Mars project, actually sent his Tesla to the space just because of inspiration and just because he could. And that was, from my point of view, that was a pretty arrogant way to spend your money, even if you have a lot.
I mean, you mean taxpayers' money rather than his own money?
Partly taxpayers' money, because the Musk empire is funded by directly and indirectly from states like Nevada, Arizona, Texas, California. So yes, but also it was a very self-serving project. And yes, it had some serious inspiration potential. But the question here, whether you can spend the same amount of resources on something which is clearly advantageous for the wider community or not. And we have a lot of problems in the neighborhood we should solve in a quite short period of time.
I feel like Elon Musk gets way too much credit because everybody thinks about him when they think about Mars. And I just want to shout out to my old Cornell professor, Professor Steve Squires. There's no way he remembers me, but I took his class way back in the 2000s. And he was one of the guys that designed some of the equipment on the Mars rovers. We would go to class every day, and he would show us the latest pictures that his rover picked up on Mars. And actually, one of the rovers got stuck in like a mud, like quicksand type thing on Mars. And like over the course of the semester, we watched his rover like slowly die. And he was like, he got very emotional about it. But the reason I bring him up is because this is somebody who wants to go to Mars or wants to send technology to Mars because he wonders if there was life there. And there is some evidence that there was water, that there might have been life there. And he thinks that maybe there is some answer to our past or to our future in the things that are there to understand on Mars. But this goes back to Greg's point, and it goes back to the first thing that we said here. You have to clearly define what it is you're doing. Is it worth the cost to go to Mars, to get this information right now when we have so many problems here that we can't pay for? I don't know. That's where the policy gets to come into place, and that's where we can have a larger discussion. I think one of the things we can do here is set the terms and the discourse for that discussion that isn't being had. Because right now, people watch The Martian, or people look at Elon Musk, or people think, oh my God, like I can hear the wind on Mars, and they think these emotional things, and they don't think through, okay, well, what does that mean? What is the cost? What is the benefit?
And you just don't have endless resources.
We have to have a conversation about like, what is humanity getting from the opportunity cost of doing it? And it may be something. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand it well enough. I can tell you that I've met very charismatic people in my life who will argue you to death about, no, this is exactly what humanity needs to be doing. Here are all the reasons why. But we don't talk about them. We talk about Elon Musk because he's crazy and he goes on interviews. We don't empower the people who can actually teach us things about these things to have conversations in the public discourse. We empower the people who like Twitter's algorithm, or we all click on.
I have to tell you a very funny little story. A few years ago, I met the deputy governor of Nevada in a pub in Switzerland. And he was there because he was in a lobbying process of the Winter Olympics. And which is funny from Nevada, but still. And that was the time when Musk just signed the newest contract with the state of Nevada on the Gigafactory sponsorship and tax credits and etc. And I asked the governor how to imagine a negotiation with Elon Musk on this. And that was very funny because he told me that I just can't imagine that. That's so different from any other thing that he seen in his life. They scheduled the meeting, the topic and the agenda was set. It was only and just about the Gigafactory thing and how the factory itself and the state of Nevada will cooperate in the future. And Musk arrived and he could talk only about Mars and nothing about the factory and nothing about the texting and nothing about the Tesla, only about Mars. So that was his strategy, to talk about some quite abstract, long-term, far-away issue which is inspiring enough to sell the rest of history. Mm-hmm. And we should be aware of this because this is a marketing genius here. But still, a marketing genius. And the market are the US taxpayer and the general humanity at the end.
there's quite a lot of talk about terraforming Mars. Kind of like we were gods who are bringing life to a desert planet.
The question is whether we will terraforming Earth.
Yeah, I think that's Greg's point. We have deserts here that we need to take care of before we need to go take care of deserts on Mars.
That's right. Yeah. The terraforming question is right here on planet Earth. That is my thesis.
Let's go on to our next topic, which is social media. You know, its utopian promise was to connect each of us and give us a more objective view on the world. But we ended up in personal bubbles, echo chambers and else. And now the whole thing seems to be crumbling. Will this end in disinterest or even collapse?
I'm not so ambitious as to say that social media is going to end in collapse. I mean, social media has become part of the way that we interact with each other, right? And anytime anybody thinks something is going to end in utopia, it's probably not true. I mean, the problem with social media is, yes, it's great if we could be connected to everyone, if everybody could say exactly what they want to say, exactly when they want to say it, and we could all have access to it. And then you begin to see what people will say when you're connected to them. They can say exactly what they want, and you gravitate towards people saying the things that you want to hear versus others. I don't find that social media is so transformative. I mean, we had letters and we had phones and we had other ways of connecting with each other. Social media just happens to be one way we connect with each other. I think that social media is part of a broader information revolution where we have access to more and more information and data and perspective and opinions than ever before. The problem is that we don't have a good way of sorting through it. And so you fall back on the things that are familiar to you.
I have to disagree, Jacob, on that, because that's one thing to use social media to connect with others. Another thing, losing contact with yourself and living in this perpetual validation based on like and comments and other kind of instant feedbacks is very dangerous and having serious effects on our brain. And we not really explored the neuroscience behind this whole addiction effect of social media. And we're just about to reveal some of his secrets, but we are still not there. And what I see is this addiction thing is very serious, seriously affecting children, also adults, and affecting our own perception of self. So we're more and more seeing only those acts and achievements valuable in life that are popular in social media. And that is different from the previous ages, like the age of telex or cable telephone. That's a big difference.
Is it that different? I mean, human beings, I feel like human beings behaved the same way before, and social media just allows them to do it quicker. I mean, human beings did horrible things.
But speed matters. Speed matters because you need some time to evaluate the feedbacks you got from the surrounding environment. If you don't have any time, that makes you more stressful and dependent on whether the mixture of these feedbacks are positive or negative.
There's another point. Privacy came quite late in the history of humanity, and we now seem to lose it. You just don't know what happens with your activities, your movements are being tracked, but it gives you the illusion that you're an autonomous actor.
To me, though, you're talking about two different things. There's the data, like personal data problem, which is an issue, and then there's social media alongside that. I mean, the way that groups and governments are going to use data, that's a very serious question. The way that they interact with social media and that can be a question too. But actually, social media itself, look, I mean, I don't mean to sound old-fashioned, but I mean, moderation is a good thing. So, I mean, people just have to interact with social media in moderation.
It's a good thing and still impossible. If you see the example of Facebook, even the mid-level managers of the companies keep saying that, sorry guys, but we don't have enough human labor to do the moderation thing properly. A few weeks ago, they sold a little girl on Facebook on a live auction somewhere in the world. And here in Hungary, a few of my friends were actually banned because of a supportive political message without any harsh language. They were instantly banned for 30 days. So the imbalance is serious. It's very ironic how behind this problem is actually a labor force problem at Facebook. They don't have any live labor force to manage that's huge moderation problem.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and the deeper point that you're really driving at there, and this goes back to what we said in the first two segments, is that the technology behind social media that allows us to connect in a million different ways, that technology can be used in any particular way, right? And Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these are all instruments that can be used by particular companies or particular people, or manipulated even by outside forces that those companies aren't even aware of. It goes back to there's the technology itself, and probably whoever had a hand in inventing the technology had their own ideas about what it was going to be used for. Then there are the platforms and the companies that use them, and then the human beings that interact with them. And all of this is, whenever you're looking at something on social media, you have to think about who is holding the strings here, and how is this being used, and how am I being used in the context of this grander thing.
I'm not sure if the human nature is able to take this amount of responsibility while a CEO of a worldwide social media company has today. This is a new level of responsibility because of the volume. This is bigger than any empires before. Facebook, when it comes to numbers, it's the largest empire ever. Why Sheryl Sandberg or anyone else would be able to manage this responsibility? I'm not sure that the human capabilities and capacities makes it possible.
You know, when you think about an empire, if Sheryl Sandberg or Mark Zuckerberg said, to all people who have Facebook, I want you now to not eat meat on Sundays, nobody would listen to them. Like, they don't have any kind of real programmatic power in that sense.
Don't underestimate. There would be a lot of people.
Because you can't compare it to, when the Roman emperor said, all citizens of Rome will do X, or when the Pope said all Catholics will do Y. Certain things would happen. Facebook is not that kind of thing. It doesn't have
We do this already indirectly. We buy those things, we go to those pages, we watch those videos. We're doing this.
Facebook can't fight the market. So if people find that Facebook is manipulating in this way that they don't like, or is shutting down different types of conversations they don't like, you can delete your Facebook at any time. There will be no consequences for you doing so.
And the interesting thing that you won't. So,
well, you might. Many people are.
Many, but only a minority. And because only a very narrow minority have the strength and will to do this. And I think doing things that are coded in a hidden way to your habits is the largest danger of the social media thing. So I'm not talking about the direct effect. I'm talking about the neural and direct thing. But you just don't realize when you're doing it.
Yeah, you're talking about the power of sort of inertia and of humans not being able to make change.
And the human brain is something that is still there to explore. Neuroscience is a relatively underdeveloped field. We know a lot more about our oceans than about our brains, with a reason. The human brain is very unique and unparalleled. And my intuition is that with social media and screens in general, we invented something that affects our brain ways we don't understand. We are the rulers of our cars, our flats. We are rulers of our travels, I would say, but not our brains, in a sense that we already spend much more time on screens that we are deciding directly to spend.
Sure, but that's because screens have become integrated into our political and social and economic lives. I guess I have
even deeper. I think even deeper.
Sure, even deeper. But I think the thing that, like you were talking about, the human brain, I mean, the thing that makes us different than animals is that we can decide to do something.
Or not.
That's
a hypothesis.
That's a hypothesis? I might go delete Facebook tonight, just so I can prove my end of the hypothesis.
You will destroy and delete your Facebook account because you are strong enough for a lot of other reasons to do this. And your personality is part of those very narrow minority that are strong enough to make these moves. So it actually would be not a surprise for me in your case. It will be a surprise in a lot of other cases.
Sure, but I mean, I think there are certain things that human beings have control over and certain things that they don't. So you don't have a choice of coming from a Protestant background. Hungarian is your mother tongue. I don't have a choice of having been born sort of half Jewish, half Scottish, and born in the United States, all these other things. I have no free will. I have no control over these things. I have control over what I'm going to pick off of the menu for dinner tonight. I don't have control over what's on the menu necessarily, all these other things. But there are certain basic things that I can choose.
That's a good example.
Yeah, it is.
You don't have control on the menu. Social media is the menu itself.
I do have control over the menu in the sense that if I don't like the menu, I can go somewhere else.
In the social media thing, you can't go to somewhere else because you go there because of the others, and the others are there and not any other place.
I think people are going somewhere else because I think all of us are in the generation where Facebook was huge. And I think for all of us in our generation, Facebook is still huge. But younger people
in
don't
America,
like...
in the developing world, it's still growing.
It's still... In America, younger people don't really like Facebook.
But not because of these reasons, not because of this sophisticated reasoning.
Sure.
Just because they have other things, like Instagram, which is a company owned by Facebook.
Yeah, it's mildly comforting to me that it's not because of these reasons, because ultimately Facebook is subject to market forces. They are only as good as they are attractive to the people who use it.
Because of their grandmas are there, and that's disturbing, and I can understand them. But they are on Instagram, and Instagram is operated by pretty much the same people.
That's a pretty good business strategy to buy up the escape routes as well. We have to wrap up here. Thank you, Greg and Jacob, for your points and the interesting conversation.
Thank you. Look forward to more.
I encourage our listeners to subscribe for the coming episodes and share or recommend Brain Bar's podcast series to your friends. Please tell us what you think by joining Brain Bar community on Facebook. Thank you for being with us, and see you soon.